My parents didn't notice I moved to another state, but now my father calling and demanding that. If you walked into my childhood home, you'd think my family was perfect. Smiling portraits lined the walls, carefully curated moments of what looked like a happy family. But behind those smiles was a lie. Because in my family, there was only one child that mattered, and it wasn't me. Growing up, I learned quickly that love in my family was conditional. My younger brother, Ethan, was the golden child, the favorite, the one my parents built their entire world around. And me? I was just there, a background character in my own home. At first, I thought it was normal, that every family had a favorite, that it was just the way things were. But as I got older, I started to notice things, like how Ethan's birthdays were always huge, extravagant celebrations, while mine were a last-minute cake and a half-hearted, happy birthday before my parents moved on to talk about him. Or how when Ethan got a B on his report card, my parents threw a fit, hired a tutor, and blamed his teachers. But when I brought home straight A's, I got a distracted nod at best, and at worst, a shrug, like it didn't matter. The favoritism was subtle at first, but as we grew older, it became impossible to ignore. Ethan got the best clothes, the best toys, the best treatment. He got to pick family vacations, decide what we watched on TV, what we had for dinner. And every time I tried to speak up, I was shut down. Because in my parents' eyes, Ethan was the star, and I was just the shadow. By the time we were teenagers, Ethan had grown into a self-absorbed, entitled brat, and my parents fed into it. He knew he could do no wrong in their eyes. He knew that no matter what he did, my parents would cover for him, and he made sure I knew it too. Because if Ethan had a purpose in life, it was to make mine miserable. He stole from me, not just money, but ideas, achievements, moments that should have been mine. He'd take credit for my work in school, my creative projects, even my jokes. And when I confronted him, he just laughed, because he knew, no matter what, our parents would take his side. By the time I hit 18, I was done. I had spent my entire childhood being ignored, overlooked, treated like I was second place in my own life. And now, I had a way out. I had worked my ass off in school, earning myself a full-ride scholarship to one of the top colleges in the country. It was my ticket to freedom. But when I told my parents, they refused to let me go. My father, James, sat me down and gave me his final verdict. You'll go to the local college. That's final. I blinked. What? Why? He leaned back in his chair, his expression stone cold. Because we don't want Ethan to feel bad. I felt my stomach drop. Excuse me? Your brother doesn't have the same academic opportunities as you, my mother added. It wouldn't be fair to him if you went off to some fancy college while he had to settle for less. I stared at them, unable to believe what I was hearing. This wasn't about what was best for me. It was about keeping Ethan on top, about making sure I didn't outshine their favorite son. I wanted to fight back, to tell them no, but I knew my parents. I knew that if I argued, they would just make my life hell. So instead, I played along. I told them I'd stay, that I'd go to the local college, just like they wanted. But I had a plan, because if they were going to force me into a life I didn't want, then I was going to lie my way out of it. I made a deal. Fine, I'll stay, but I want to live in the dorms. They agreed immediately, too happy, too relieved, too eager to believe I had given in. But what they didn't know was that the moment I packed my bags for dorm life, I wasn't staying in town. I was leaving, for good. They thought I was attending the local college, but in reality, I had already enrolled in the prestigious university states away. I used my scholarship to cover tuition, and the money they sent me for my local college fees, I used it to build my new life. And for the first time ever, I was finally free. I spent the next few years focusing on myself. No family calls, no family visits, just me, my degree, and the life I was supposed to have. And by the time I graduated early, I had already secured a six-figure job. I had made something of myself, and they still had no idea. Because in all that time, my parents had never once checked on me, never once asked how I was doing. To them, I was out of sight, out of mind, just a shadow. But then, after years of silence, my father suddenly called. And what he said made my blood run cold. For years, my parents hadn't noticed I was gone. They thought I was living in the dorms, going to the local college, staying close to home, just like they wanted. They never checked in, never visited, never asked about my classes, my grades, my life, and I was fine with that. Because for the first time in my entire existence, I wasn't living in Ethan's shadow. I had finally built a life that was mine, until the phone rang, and the past I had escaped came crashing back. I was at my desk when I saw the name flash across my screen. Dad. For a moment, I just stared at it. Because why now? Why, after all these years, was he suddenly calling me? Some part of me thought, maybe, just maybe, they finally cared. Maybe they had realized their mistakes. Maybe they were reaching out because they actually missed me. But the moment I answered, I knew. This wasn't about me. It was about Ethan. Because of course it was. You need to come home, my father said, his voice tight. I frowned. Excuse me? It's Ethan. He's in trouble, and we need your help. I almost laughed. Ethan? In trouble? That was new. For as long as I could remember, Ethan had been untouchable. My parents had always cleaned up his messes, bailed him out of bad situations, made sure he never faced real consequences. So for them to actually ask me for help, something must have gone really, really wrong. What kind of trouble? I asked, keeping my voice calm. My father let out a heavy sigh. He made some bad investments, lost a lot of money, and now, well, he's in serious debt. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the desk. And what does that have to do with me? My father hesitated. Then, in a voice that made my stomach turn, he said, "We need you to pay it off." Silence. Complete, utter silence. I actually had to take a second to process what I had just heard. Because surely I had misunderstood. Surely my parents, the same parents who had ignored me for years, who had never once supported me, who had never cared about my success, were not actually asking me to clean up Ethan's financial disaster. But oh, they were. You want me to pay off his debt? I repeated slowly, making sure I hadn't misheard. It's only fair, my father said, as if this was the most logical thing in the world. You have a good job now, don't you? I felt a cold, bitter laugh rise in my throat. So let me get this straight. When I needed support, when I was working my ass off to get out of that house, you didn't lift a finger. But now that Ethan's in trouble, suddenly I'm the family's piggy bank? My father's tone hardened. Watch your attitude. Oh, that did it. That sent me over the edge. I leaned forward, gripping my phone so tight my knuckles turned white. No, Dad. You watch your attitude. Because I am not paying a single damn cent to bail out Ethan. That's your problem, not mine. And then, I hung up. For the next few days, the messages poured in. From my father, from my mother, even from Ethan himself. Each one more desperate, more demanding, more manipulative than the last. Mom, we're family. You can't just abandon us like this. Dad, Ethan's your brother. If you don't help him, you're turning your back on your own blood. Ethan, come on, don't be like this. You know I'd do the same for you. That one actually made me laugh. Because Ethan had never done anything for me. Not once. And now he expected me to save him. But the final message? That was the one that made me realize just how delusional they were. Because a week later, my mother sent me this. We talked it over. You'll be moving back home next month. We've already made the arrangements. Don't worry, we'll find you a job nearby. I stared at the screen, stunned. They actually thought they could just decide my life for me. Like I was still the invisible, obedient child they had ignored for years. Like I was still under their control. And that was the moment I knew. It was time to show them just how much I had changed. I stared at my mother's message, stunned. We talked it over. You'll be moving back home next month. We've already made the arrangements. Don't worry, we'll find you a job nearby. I had spent years away from them. Years rebuilding my life, carving out something for myself, finally becoming my own person. And yet, they still thought they had the power to dictate my future. Like I was still some helpless kid, desperate for their approval. Like I didn't have a choice. But this time, I did. and I was going to make sure they never forgot it. I took a deep breath, cracking my knuckles. Then, I started typing. Me, you must have me confused with someone else. I won't be moving anywhere. And I sure as hell won't be giving Ethan a single dime. My mother replied instantly. Mom, don't be ridiculous. We're your parents. We know what's best for you. I felt rage crawl up my spine. Because that was their favorite excuse. Whenever they ignored me, whenever they overlooked my achievements, whenever they made everything about Ethan, we know what's best. Well, this time, I did. Me, no, Mom. You know what's best for Ethan. You always have. And that's exactly why I left. You didn't even notice when I moved to another state. That's how little I mattered to you. Silence. For the first time, my mother didn't have an instant response. And then, a single reply. Mom, that's not fair. I almost laughed. Fair? Now they cared about fair? A few hours later, my father called again. This time, I answered. Not because I wanted to hear him out, but because I wanted him to hear me. You need to stop this nonsense, he snapped before I could even say hello. Family sticks together. We're not asking you to do anything unreasonable. I clenched my jaw. You're asking me to pay off Ethan's mistakes. You can afford it, he barked. Do you know how selfish you sound right now? I took a deep breath, my voice calm, steady, unshakable. You're right, Dad. I can afford it. Because I worked my ass off while you were too busy worshiping Ethan. But just because I can help doesn't mean I will. He's your mess. You clean it up. There was a long, tense silence. Then, my father's voice lowered. If you turn your back on us now, don't expect to be part of this family anymore. And there it was. The ultimatum. The final attempt to control me. But what he didn't realize was that they had stopped being my family a long time ago. I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. That's fine, Dad. Excuse me? I leaned back, my voice calm, composed, final. If cutting you off is what it takes to finally be free, then so be it. And then, I hung up. For good. I stared at my phone, my father's last words still ringing in my ears. If you turn your back on us now, don't expect to be part of this family anymore. For most of my life, that sentence would have terrified me. I would have begged to stay, swallowed my pride, done whatever it took to be included. But now, it just made me laugh. Because they had already cast me aside years ago. They just hadn't noticed. Until now, and for the first time ever, I was the one leaving them behind. After hanging up, I sat in silence, waiting for the emotions to hit, waiting to feel guilty, sad, conflicted. But I felt nothing. No regret, no doubt, just peace. Because I had spent my entire childhood fighting for scraps of their attention, begging them to see me, to love me, to care. But they never had, and they never would. The messages kept coming over the next few days. First, they were angry. Mom, you're being cruel. We raised you, and this is how you repay us. Dad, we did everything for you, and you turn your back on your own blood? Ethan, wow. So much for family. Guess you think you're too good for us now. I ignored them. Then, the guilt trip started. Mom, you don't understand, sweetie. Ethan made some mistakes, but he's your brother. Dad, you're not the only one who's worked hard. Life hasn't been easy for us either. I ignored those too. And then came the desperation. Mom, we miss you. We don't want to lose you. Just talk to us, please. Dad, fine. You win. Just call us back. Let's talk. But I knew better. This wasn't about missing me. This wasn't about family. This was about money. They wanted me back in their lives only because they needed something from me. And once I gave it to them, they'd go back to forgetting I existed. So this time, I wasn't falling for it. Then, one night, my phone rang again. I almost ignored it until I saw the name on the screen. Ethan. I hesitated. Not because I wanted to talk to him, but because I was curious. So, for the first time since my father's call, I picked up. Took you long enough, Ethan scoffed. I leaned back, crossing my arms. What do you want? Look, I get it. You're mad. You feel like we treated you unfairly, or whatever. I stayed silent. Because I wasn't mad. I was just done. But at the end of the day, we're still family, he continued. And family helps each other out. I laughed. Did you help me out when I was struggling? When I was working 2 jobs to escape that house? When I was being treated like I was invisible? Silence. Then, finally, a bitter sigh. I didn't think it was that bad for you, all right? Of course you didn't, I said, shaking my head, because you never had to think about me at all. For a moment, I thought he was going to apologize. That maybe, just maybe, there was some part of him that understood. But then, he spoke again, and any hope I had left vanished. Look, can we just skip the sob story? He snapped. I don't have time for this. I need money, and you have it. So are you going to help me or not? And just like that, I smiled, because now I had all the proof I needed. Ethan didn't care. My parents didn't care. They never had, and they never would. I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice calm and steady. No, Ethan. He scoffed. Excuse me? I'm not giving you a cent, and I'm not talking to you again, ever. There was a long, stunned silence. Then, you're actually serious? He said, laughing like he couldn't believe it. I am. You're willing to just walk away from your own family over some childhood grudge? I shook my head. This isn't about a grudge. This is about me finally realizing I don't owe you anything. His laughter died, because for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't getting what he wanted, and he didn't know what to do. You're gonna regret this, he snapped. You're gonna be alone one day, and you'll come crawling back, begging us to take you in. I smiled. No, Ethan, I won't. But you? You'll regret this for the rest of your life. And then, I hung up, and this time, I blocked their numbers. Every single one of them, because my family wasn't my family anymore. And that was the best decision I ever made. The moment I blocked them, I felt free. For the first time in years, there was no weight on my chest, no constant guilt, no feeling like I had to prove myself to people who would never care. I was done, and as I set my phone down, I made a decision. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was making sure they never found me again. I changed my number, deleted my old email accounts, blocked them on social media, because knowing them, they would try to find another way in, try to guilt me back, try to make me feel like the villain in their story. But I wasn't playing that role anymore. I had spent too long letting them dictate who I was. Now, I was in control. The first few days were quiet, peaceful. I went to work, focused on my career, my goals, my happiness. And I realized something. They had been the only negative thing left in my life. Everything else was exactly how I had always wanted it to be. I had a great job, a beautiful apartment, friends who actually cared about me, a life that was finally mine. And them? They weren't a part of it. Then, a week later, an email came through from an unknown sender, but I didn't need to guess who it was, because the subject line said it all. You owe us this. I sighed, debating whether to delete it immediately, but curiosity won. So I opened it, and what I read made me sick. Your selfishness has destroyed this family. After everything we did for you, this is how you treat us? Your father and I are ashamed of you. Ethan is struggling, and you have the power to help him. But instead, you turn your back on him like a heartless stranger. When you come to your senses, we'll be waiting. But we won't wait forever. I stared at the screen, shaking my head. Because this wasn't love. This wasn't family. This was manipulation. And the worst part? They still didn't see it. I didn't respond. I didn't even bother reading it twice. I just did the only thing that felt right. I deleted it, because I didn't owe them anything. Not a reply, not an explanation, not a single second more of my life. I had already given them too much, and now I was taking it all back. The email should have been the last attempt, but my family, they never knew when to quit, because when they realized I wasn't answering their messages, wasn't calling back, wasn't falling for their guilt trips anymore, they took it a step further, and this time, they crossed a line. It started with a coworker. I was at my desk, focused on a project, when Jessica, one of my work friends, came over with a confused look. Hey, weird question. Are you close with your family? I frowned. Not really. Why? She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. Because someone called the office today, asking about you. I felt my stomach drop. What did they say? Jessica bit her lip. They said they were your parents, that they'd been worried sick because you won't return their calls. They asked if the company could confirm your address so they could send you a care package. I went ice cold, because that wasn't concern. That was them trying to track me down. I forced a smile, keeping my voice steady. And what did the office say? Jessica rolled her eyes. HR shut it down. We don't give out employee info to anyone. But it was weird, right? Like, if you guys were close, wouldn't they have your address? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Yeah, I said, my voice dry. Super weird. And inside, I was seething. Because they had just proven my biggest fear. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to reconnect. They wanted to control me, to pull me back into their web. And if I didn't come willingly, they were willing to hunt me down. I went home that night and did the only thing I could. I changed everything. A new phone number, a new email. I even paid to have my personal information removed from online databases. Because my family, they had never given me a choice. But now, I was making one. And this time, they would never find me again. I used to think that family was forever. That no matter how bad things got, no matter how much they hurt me, they would always be a part of my life. But after everything they had done, after years of neglect, after trying to guilt me back, after tracking me down at work, I finally understood the truth. Some people aren't meant to stay in your life, even if they're family. Once I changed my phone number, email, and personal information, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Real, actual peace. No more texts. No more calls. No more guilt. Just silence. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I embraced it. Months passed, then a year. And in that time, I flourished. I got promoted. I traveled. I met new people who actually valued me. I built a life that was mine and mine alone. And them? They became a distant memory. Because no matter how much they had tried to make me feel small, no matter how much they had tried to control me, in the end, I was the one who won. Because I left. And I never looked back. One day, I got curious. I asked a mutual acquaintance if they had heard anything about my parents or Ethan. And the answer made me smirk. Ethan had burned through his savings. His debts had only gotten worse. And my parents? They were still trying to save him, still enabling him, still making the same mistakes. Because in the end, they hadn't changed, and they never would. The difference now? I wasn't there to clean up the mess, and I never would be again, because I had finally moved on. And them? They were stuck in the past, exactly where they belonged.